I am Don Tess, better known as the Don of Beer.
And I'm Em Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
Welcome to episode 76 of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. This week on the show, we are going to talk about brewing with heritage corn. But first, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you want to support the show, please visit allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. So, Em, what do you think about corn in beers?
It's I like when the corn adds like sweetness and it's subtle. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a huge I tend to find that if it's too corny, then it kind of leans on the DMS like cabbagey note because it can
Mm-hmm.
be like cream corn and whatnot. I know that's not from that's different, that's malt, that's a
Well,
flavor.
wouldn't the corn be some of the source of
But
DMS,
yeah,
maybe?
I just it's not my like I like corn beers and I like using like I think it's cool. I just I don't know. I think it's good. I'm excited to talk about corn and maybe I'll change my tune.
Yeah.
But what about you?
Exactly what you said. Like, I think if people are using corn as a flavor,
Hmm.
as opposed to as a cheapener,
Yeah.
then I'm all for it. And everybody, listeners at home, if you like corny jokes, this episode will have you grinning from ear to ear. But
I'm glad,
first,
yeah, puns are your territory, man, not mine.
there is a kernel of truth to that. But first, if you would like to help support the All About Beer podcast, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of supporting the show, here is a word from our sponsors.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family owned, operated, and argued over.
Evan Watson is the founder and co-owner of Plan B Farm Brewery of Poughkeepsie, New York, the first ever all 100% New York ingredient sustainable farm brewery, using only yeast cultivated from their beehives to ferment all their wild ales, making his beers truly regional. Evan moved from his home state in Indiana to New York City in 2007 when he signed his first record contract for his original music. After many successful years in the industry, he and his wife decided to start a business together in the Hudson Valley, and in 2013, Plan B Farm Brewery was born. It's been just the two of them, farming, brewing, and selling their one-of-a-kind brews on their 25-acre organic farm ever since. Welcome to the show, Evan.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent, and it will be much
Excellent.
better in a couple minutes when you tell us everything about we need to know about heritage corn.
I'm not
Um,
going to be able to do that, but I'll
oh,
try.
Tell us what
um,
you know for the most
yeah.
part. And you do
So
Yeah.
know.
for us neophytes, what is heritage corn and how is it different from the corn I can go to the Kroger's and buy?
Well, I'd say there's a major delineation between what we call like dent corn, or a lot of people say feed corn, and sweet corn. When you're going to the grocery store, you're buying a varietal of corn that's intentionally consumed when the kernels are soft and sweet. And they've been bred for many, many years to have those soft, sweet, natural, what we think of as an ear of corn with a slab of butter on it, flavors. But the corn that historically, I think, built much of this nation is dent corn, and it's called dent corn because when it dries, each kernel, and it's intended to be dried for preservative and for many things, but each kernel has a dent, so
Yeah.
that the kind of like meniscus or like that a little bit oval top gets dented down, and it's one of the telltale signs that the corn is ready for harvesting and picking. But in terms of heritage corn, I mean, this country is also modernly found, like it's one of our largest exports is dent corn, but a lot of it is monoculture, Monsanto Bayer. That's the company, right?
Yeah.
Monsanto Bayer
Oh boy.
Yeah.
sprayed,
Because if those two
sprayed.
companies weren't large enough on their own,
Yeah,
now they're one.
exactly.
Anyways, sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you.
Well, and we can get into the history of that. That's a wacky history. But yeah, but Monsanto corn, or like this very monoculture corn that I grew up with in Indiana, and these endless fields of the same thing. It's very much designed some for animal feed, but mostly it'll even go to it'll go to China and become high fructose corn syrup and come back and poison all of us. So we're trying to stay away from that when we're talking about heritage corn. We're talking more about cool like heirloom varieties that you might have seen, around like around stores in the fall with stocks, and some people say Indian corn. I don't know how PC that is anymore, but the different colors of hard dent corn, and that's stuff I grow on the farm here.
Okay, cool.
So how is that style of corn used in beer? Like what can it contribute? I mean, I assume it'll contribute flavor and aroma, but anything else like foam stability or clarity or fermentation?
Yeah, it's a great question. The So I guess 10 years ago I started planting these corn varietals. Um, I purchased seed Bloody Butcher, which is kind of a popular one because it's this deep red, sanguine, like gorgeous color, and large ears. And in fact, when the first generation of planting it, I grew some stocks that were 16 feet tall,
Ooh.
Whoa.
which is really, it is pretty gnarly. It's pretty interesting. The these old corns, I guess I'm not answering your question about it's in the brewing process, but if I can wax for a second
Go
about
ahead. Go
how
ahead.
magical these things are in the field. Um, we've commodified corn, even the dent corn I was talking about, like the kind of Monsanto corn, or the way we think of cornfields to be about the height of a human, to be about 6 feet tall, and then to have two or three ears that are a little under a foot. And that's because that's picking, we can easily walk by and pick them. However, if their ancestors, which we can even talk about the ancestors to these heritage corns, but they're ancestors of modern, I mean, 1800s corn modification, which is what Bloody Butcher. The other one I grow is Blue Claridge, and I grow Reed's Yellow Dent. Those are all in like early 19th century corns, and they will grow. They'll have like one ear that's like a foot and a half to 2 feet long, and they'll grow
Oh,
16 feet tall.
wow.
Holy crap.
Yeah, especially Bloody Butcher. And it has this like its husk, the exterior of the corn when it dries, because these are all field dried corns. Um, it has this like reddish hue to the husk. It's gorgeous. I love growing these corns, and
And sorry to interrupt, then is each kernel also like super large or are they kind of the
not
same?
really. It's like it's very similar to your like the yellow dent corn or feed corn kernel.
Yeah.
I'd say
There's just a lot more kernels per 2 foot ear.
exactly.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
and so the reason that uh, um, they're also very thick. So the stalks then are like their diameter is very large. And
Okay.
part of that is to keep it like naturally, I guess genetically modified, we get all stuck in this thing. And obviously, like Monsanto corn, super GMO, it's sprayed for fungus, it's sprayed for insects. You can't regrow the seed, it's not open pollinated. There's like all these issues with that. But we have been genetically modifying, even Native Americans were genetically modifying corn, just selecting certain things over the other things. And so
Right.
these, like this Bloody Butcher has this history in Virginia of at least being modern, or a modern corn of Virginia as of the early 19th
Right.
century. But um, its stock is so large. These qualities are what kind of make it desirable and why we selected them over other styles of corn. Its stock is so large that cutworm, which is a worm or like more of a kind of grub that can grow alongside corn, it will eat the stalk of corn and knock them down. But it's so hardy and wide in dimension that cutworm's unable to consume that. So that's one of the reasons it's so big. But then
Hmm.
the other reason is if you deer love corn, deer are very native uh, macroflora of our area, and deer can't reach the kernels and they can't reach the ears if it's one ear that's like 8 feet up in the air. And
Right.
Hmm.
so
Cool.
it's interesting, and everything's been shrunk down for commodifying a modern
Yeah.
sense of corn. But yeah, it's the growing them has been teaching in that way. I mean, I've learned just from growing them all these old stories,
Yeah. Yeah. So you
but
didn't that was great and with sincerity, but you didn't actually answer M's question,
no,
which is
I'm
then
good at
how do
not
you
answering questions.
how do you use that then
Yeah.
in beer? And then like does it have a different flavor than we would expect? Does it contribute, you know?
So I brew at our brewery. I make all these kind of wild beers. So I cultivate yeast from our bees. Everything is fermented in oak. The main beer I brew is called barn beer, and a good portion of all of my brewing is both malted and unmalted grains. Um, and with the corn, I do the same. I use it like I'll use 80% malted grains for most of our beers, and I'll use 20%, most often unmalted wheat, as some type of kind of starchy adjunct
Okay.
that's helps create protein matrix. It helps create head stability, all those things. It also, because I'm dealing with a lot of different um, microflora and bugs. They enjoy the more complex starches and proteins of unmalted grain.
Ah,
So
okay.
I use the corn. I've never used it as malted. You can malt corn, but I've only used it as an adjunct that is unmalted to kind of create head density, softness. I make a lot of beers that are quite tart. So like it's nice to have a little bit of softness to balance that palate. Um, Britannomyces really enjoys chewing on these more complex starches as well. So it makes for a more complex fermentation in a capacity. But yeah, when I've used corn, I've only used it the same way I do kind of unmalted grains for
Okay.
my farmhousey funky beers.
Okay. So, I think a lot of people when they get into beer, their first exposure to corn or one of the things they learn about corn, when they're reading books about beer, is that corn is an adjunct that a cheap adjunct that, the big multinational brewers use to lighten the body and make their beer cheaper. So how do you respond to that? I'm guessing
Well, I'd
you
say
don't
that's
use corn
kind
the
of
same way, but you
well,
don't
I'd
use it the
say
same way.
but I'd also say that's a kind of not fair and mean
Yeah, okay.
description of like macro beer using corn. I mean, corn is like more than barley. I mean, with the exception of if there's certain ancient grains, but they're not really from here. We have a connection to barley because of European settling. I mean, corn is that's our thing. That's America's. It's not, that's our starch thing, as opposed to, a lot of these grains are coming from other countries. It all comes from Mesopotamia at its origin,
Hmm.
and there's rices, there is, triticale, there different kinds of old stuff, emmer stuff, ancient grains, but corn is very historically American, and maize is very historically of the land. So like I think it's a good thing. There's and I guess there's like in cream ale, or it's different than that in Miller Coors utilization of it, but it's like I don't know if I think about it like that. I think it's pretty cool that they use corn. Like,
Okay.
I, yeah, it's less expensive, I guess. I mean, it's probably more expensive than rice. I can't speak on any of this stuff, but really, but I am, I guess. But I don't know if I like I kind of love, I have this different perspective of because I am 100% New York State. I did a thing uh 13 years ago making these beers where everybody said it was impossible. And I bought the first bag of malt that had been malted in the guy's fish tank post-prohibition in New York State. And that was my first batch of beer. So, and then I got like this really close relationship with 6 row barley. And I love 6 row barley. It's my favorite stuff because it grows
Mm,
better here. So I have these relationships. So I think about things slightly differently than most American craft brewers who are emulating European brewing.
right.
Like I think about things like I think Miller Coors and some of these they're like preserving a tradition that's more local to me, more American by using 6 row barley and corn.
Hmm.
That seems very American to me.
Hmm.
And so I
Um,
don't know. I went off on that.
yeah, no, that's cool. And I like that. I mean, to the extent that terroir is a thing that people care about, corn is part of American terroir, I think is what you're saying, right? So,
Absolutely in 6 row barley as well.
and
It's
six
like
row bar, yeah,
and the things that have kind of been demonized. But I mean, what if I mean, it's an easy question, but like what seems more local, like a giant macro brewery that can afford to grow 6 row barley in this country and uses corn as an adjunct. Is that more American than the your local brewer who's using Maris Otter and from
right,
England and English yeast and New Zealand hops? I don't know. What's more
right.
American, you know?
You sort of touched around price, but I know, for example, you are growing your own corn. I'm imagining that if you're growing, 16-foot tall corn that might only yield, each stalk might only yield 2 or 3 ears, um, that I'm imagining that corn must be economically more expensive than using barley. Is that accurate?
For sure. I mean, I got a 5 acre field of barley right now.
Okay.
Fairly easy to plant. And whenever I do corn, I do like it's like a quarter of an acre or less. And it's all because I have to manually I have an old combine, it's from the 40s, but that I use for the grains. And then for the corn though, I pick it all by hand and then I
Oh,
process it all by hand. Yeah, but nothing I've ever done is economical. I don't think about those things very often. It's probably why we're going out of business. But yeah, it's more of a love. I mean, but I'll tell you what is kind of economical is I mentioned those 3 varietals that I grew from 10 years ago, the Bloody Butcher, Reed's Yellow, and Blue Clare, Ohio Blue Claridge, and they are open pollinating. So they cross pollinated out in the field. And then I've saved that seed and I've never purchased any other seed than that. And it's creating kind of like genetic anomalies. There's this amazing these ears I get sometimes that I keep saving, but they're like mostly white and they have like a couple little blues and a couple little yellows, but they're strikingly beautiful. And in the cob, the center cob is that reddish hued Bloody Butcher, and it looks
mm,
like a Bloody Butcher cob, but it has some of these kind of recessive genetics of these ancient corns. It's pretty cool. So like,
that's
yeah,
so
and
cool.
it's not economical at all. I mean, and even none of the stuff I do is, but it's like,
What flavor, like these corns, like what flavors are they adding besides a corniness? Like, I mean, I guess people know what corn tastes like, but are they adding anything? Because you do a lot of farmhouse ale stuff. Like
yeah, that's
what
all
kind
I
of,
do. Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Oh, I do that lager beer. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I was like, I had a lager at your brewery.
that is true.
What kinds of like flavors and aromas are people going to get when you use this corn, or are you just using it for head retention fermentables,
and
just for
and feeding the
yeah.
microbes, I guess.
And yeah, feeding the Brett because you said they love the
Yeah, it is worth talking about, I guess. When I use corn as opposed to raw wheat in these beers, a lot of the beers is like a lot of process. So I brew spontaneous beers as well, which I go through like turbine mashing, 13-step old process, and then cool ship cooled, and then oak fermented and aged forever. So there's an element of a lot of my beers where I feel like the raw ingredients aren't as exposed. If you had like a sharper mono ferment, like a crisper lager or something, you'd go, oh, this is corny because of that. It's like it is more at their basic um, building blocks of what they, like scientifically what they are. Uh, and then the terroir and flavor of the barn and fermentation probably drives it more than anything. But an interesting thing about these corns versus the raw wheat is the beers that age with corn, I find become more acidic. So I think there
Hmm.
is a connection between, the available components of corn, raw corn versus raw wheat, like starches and such, that like lactobacillus prefers in long fermentation. Like most of my beers, they might develop a pediococcal kind of like thickness, like some of sick beer of the Belgians, and will develop a different kind of acidity from a pediococcus fermentation. But the corn ones very distinctly, they develop more and more kind of lemony, bright citrus, lactobacillus fermentation over aging. Like they might be really sharp and clean, um, early in like a month in a bottle, but then a year later I'll open them and be like, wow, this is way more tart, and it's a very specific acidity, and I
Hmm.
I attribute that to like the corn, and also if you think about like the history of corn beer beverages or beer adjacent beverages in uh, America, Central America, like chicha and things like that, like there is like this very strong lactobacillus connection to corn. Whereas I think there's probably a relationship between barley and Saccharomyces. There's a
Right.
relationship between wheat and Brettanomyces. There's a relationship between rye and LSD, right?
Well,
There's like there are these they have these partners of fungal fermentation. I think corn is like it's lactobacillus's best friend. I've got no evidence to prove that, but I do think that might be that's
I like
other
that.
than my experience.
You've made the nerd in me very
I
happy
was
right
gonna
now.
say you are making Don just grin from ear to ear. No pun
Oh, good.
intended, corn wise.
Ah,
There
Hey,
you go,
boo,
girl.
boo.
you
Oh
can leave the
No, I
puns to
love
God.
it.
me. Thank you very much.
I got two kids. I love that's my joking right there. It's my
Evan,
favorite.
thank you for this. Kind of last question for you. For both professional brewers and home brewers, how would you recommend that they start brewing with heritage corn? Like where, you can't even buy it at Kroger, so where do you get it? And then like should they be thinking about getting it in flaked form or whole form? Or you mentioned it can be malted, torrefied. And do they need a cereal cooker? How do you use it? Where
Yeah,
should
I
they
mean,
start, I guess?
well, I think they're, like micro maltsters, local maltsters have become so ubiquitous in the States now that you could probably find a maltster near you um, it, throughout all the states. And that person is going to know somebody growing corn and they're probably processing corn. So that's the person to talk to.
Okay.
And then from flaked and torrefied, any of that stuff, it's like, obviously I'm saying I'm just picking the ears, dekerneling them, and then just throwing them through a mill raw. But cereal cooking is great. And some of the best lagers I've had, even craft like lagers or cereal, at Newberg Brewing, my friend Chris over there, he does a corn lager called, I think it's called Amazing, but it's and he does a cereal cook and it's really sharp, like it's a really nice, but then you have flaked corn, flaked maize, which can add some softness. But yeah, heritage corns, they're hard to find. I would say either find your local malt store, or you can buy like a small package of something like Bloody Butcher online pretty easily, and you don't have to have much of a plot to get a decent yield. And then if you can use that corn as a home brewer, for sure, it's plenty. Or you can save the seed in there because they're open pollinating and they're intended to dry nicely. You can save it for years, and
Mm.
you can keep building your garden of corn. And if you get different varietals, then like I did, they naturally open pollinate, and you can kind of have your own variety of corn, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. You almost make me want to brew.
Don't start. Don't do it. It's
Evan, this was
terrible.
awesome. Can you share your social media handles so people can,
Of
see
course.
your corn and everything?
Yeah, it's Plan B Farm Brewery, BEE, like the insect, on Instagram and Facebook. I have still not come over to the TikTok world. One of these days when it's not cool anymore, I'm sure I will. But yeah, that's what we got. And our website, planbfarmbrewery.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Evan.
thank you
Cheers.
guys. It's good to talk to you.
And we'll be right back with a cool story from Glenn Roberts of Anson Mills after a word from our sponsors.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family owned, operated, and argued over.
Glenn Roberts founded Anson Mills in 1998 in Charleston, South Carolina, to rematriate lost foods of the 18th and 19th century Southern pantry. Today, Anson Mills grows and produces artisan land-raised grain, legume, and oilseed ingredients for chefs and home cooks worldwide, and provides pro bono sensory research support for chefs, pastry chefs, bakers, brewers, and distillers through AM Research Initiative. Anson Mills provides pro bono seed biosecurity for the growing community of Southern organic, place-based identity preserved landrace crop farmers. Glenn is the recipient of the USA Artisan of the Year, National Pathfinder, and STIT Lifetime Achievement Awards. Glenn is a founding member of the Carolina Gold Rice Foundation and a pro bono private consultant to Stone Barn Center, Mount Vernon, National Colonial Farm, National Botanical Garden, and the Smithsonian. Welcome to the show, Glenn.
It's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
So I recently learned about a heritage corn variety called Jimmy's Red. And what I heard is it was basically down to two remaining cobs in the world. And then you have played a role then to help save that corn variety, which is now maybe thriving is not the right word, but it at least is available enough that it can be commercially used. So can you tell us about Jimmy's Red and how it was almost lost and how you were able to help save it?
Yes, and to clarify one lovely idea, James Island was a haven for African diaspora food and others include what we have names for, from any kind of beer you can think of, all the way up to White Lightning and or Hooch and or it just keeps going on. And what really happened was that the island of James Island, which is right outside of Charleston, South Carolina, the African diaspora community there um, evolved the identity of their own hooch corn. And it's also for beer, and it makes phenomenal beer. So, having said that, Jimmy Red is named after James Island.
Hmm.
Um, and it's the abbreviation for bootleggers, and that includes beer makers who are working off the grid, making phenomenal spirits and booze and beer. So, having said that, this all started in Appalachia, as most things do. It came down through the Catawba Nation, everybody thinks, which is centered in central South Carolina, and they're still there, and they're wonderful people. Um, there was a road, the meeting road, where they brought commerce both directions, both from the coast to the mountains and from Appalachia Divide all the way back to the coast. Jimmy Red came down through that exchange, and also because of runaways. So our origin in James Island is not distinct, but mostly one would argue that I think the Catawba had a lot to do with this, but local African diaspora community members created their own economy, and this was a major part of it. And it ended up being labeled such. It was the center of both grits, or the best grits and cornbread were made from Jimmy Red in Charleston. There are lots of mazes there, and white was dominant, not yellow. Yellow was mid-state, white again in the highlands, but the corns of color were used for identifying ownership in slavery, unfortunately, um, of the maize. So you'd put red kernels at a certain place and the white ears for production and export, where it was really a commodity. And that would identify where those red kernels were on that white corn, would identify what plantation, quote unquote, the corn came from. Having said that, this corn escaped scrutiny all the way through. And I think it was first made it into the public domain as rumors downtown Charleston in the 60s. But this tradition of being in downtown Charleston, and you could be green, black, white, yellow, purple, it doesn't make any difference. You could drive across the bridge to James Island, which is a short ride, and go into the rural roads on the way to Folly Beach, especially, and come up with some of the best food in the world and the best drinks in the world. There were two levels. You could get a quart jar of beer with food out the back screen door for almost nothing. Or, and that was Perlo, that was rice and peas and vegetables that they were putting out the back door. And usually could be squirrel or God knows what else going into the Perlo. We call it Perlo. It's just rice and peas with the addition of animal proteins or fish. But you could get these jars out the back door. So you got either a pint jar or even smaller, a cup jar of White Lightning, Hooch, whatever, or you could get a quart jar of beer. And it was huge cheap, and you had to know what house to go to. If you tried to go to other houses, you could get in trouble. Trespassing, et cetera, et cetera. The sheriff wasn't kind to you. So I was introduced to that sort of upside down because I was really interested in local food and the island foodways because my mom grew up there, and she knew about this. But she had never discussed it with me. It was bizarre. I had to say, "What is this about Jimmy Red, Mom?" And then she unloaded everything, said that they used to get the hooch and the beer, even up in Aiken where she was, or down in Edisto. They'd go to James Island on purpose, a lot of times on boat, so that they couldn't get busted hauling stuff around because it was illegal. So there's a short background. Fast forward to the last family on James Island that really wanted to be arrested every 3 years and one of their relatives put in jail. So you'd actually nominate somebody in your extended family to go to jail once every 3 years, call the sheriff department and the revenue people and say, okay, one of our family members, that's a person you can bust. They'll be here at this time with this amount of bootleg stuff. And so somebody in a family, and it was like a prearranged agreement. It was all business. There weren't any guns. Everybody knew they'd just show up, a ton of cop cars, sheriff, feds, and they'd haul somebody off to a low security rural jail. They'd get released for work release and get to come home every day, 5 days a week. But they were in jail for a couple of years, and that just families got tired of it. When the last family that was growing Jimmy Red under this, and no one had really tried to save, quote unquote, the maize at that point. Ted Tuning was approached by a friend of his up the road. He was living on the Stonal River in the middle of nowhere. And he's an amazing guy. He was really into food, farming, and doing his own thing. His wife was county coroner, which obviously doesn't add up immediately to good hooch or beer. But he decided to save Jimmy Red. And no one knew about it. He didn't tell anybody. And my daughter, Ansley, at that time, I think she was 6. We were driving down the Stonal River Road, which is really in the middle of nowhere. It's very unpopulated. There's a house maybe every mile or so tops, and there's the oldest plantation, quote unquote, homes on the Stono River or on that road. So you'll see one that's like 1,000 acres, and then a poor house that has a small house on it that has maybe a couple of acres off and on going down this road, and then nothing on both sides of the road. And we're in a nothing part, and Ansley screamed, "Daddy, Daddy, tall corn," because we worked together in the fields back when she was a kid. And I said, what? And she said, "Daddy, Daddy, tall corn." We made a Yui really fast and went back, and she pointed to it, and it was an Indian mound that was maybe even African Indian, which is a sun cycle marriage for um, slaves and native people who would get together and grow together. It was about 35 feet across or so, and it had this massively tall corn and all kinds of other plants growing intercropping in it. And I went, "Holy moly, what is that?" And she said, "Daddy, Daddy, tall corn again." And I said, "Yeah, we're right here." And we pulled in, and I'm worried, the guy's going to come out, he's going to have his gun, and now we're going to get hassled. And it turned out that was Ted Tuning, and he was doing that to homeschool his kids. And they were studying Indian mounds, and they were studying mound culture, they were studying polyculture, they're studying farming, genetics. He had them taking genetic lessons when they were like in the 7th grade. And they were breeding this Jimmy Red for stability and purity. And I said, "What is this corn, man? This is huge." And it was still young that time. It had tasseled, but it was early tasseling. So there wasn't anything to super look at that point, except the plant morphology, which was crazy because it was so tall. And he said, "Well, this is James Island Red. Most people around here call it Jimmy Red." I said, "Oh, you mean the stuff they make all the good beer and hooch with?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why are you growing it? It belongs to the African diaspora community here." And he said, "Well, it's actually maroon, and the Catawba were in on it." And I didn't know a whole lot about that at that time. And I fell in love with the idea. And I said, "Hey, when you mature this out, can you share some ears with my daughter and I? Ansley is learning about all this. She likes to play viola in the cornfields that we're working with." And I said, "We're working with people, I guess George and Celeste Albers." And, between Tuning and George and Celeste, this whole thing started that way. Ted remained the seedsman pro bono. He didn't have an iron in the fire. He was just interested in the culture itself. And truth be known, he was doing a little for himself, never commercially. But he got it from people who had been doing it for decades, if not century. And this is how it came into the public domain. He decided that he thought that the best way to preserve that corn was to give away as much seed as possible. And it was his decision. He's the hero in this. And I facilitated a lot of it. And it just started from there and grew to the point where Ansley, my daughter, I took a picture of her just as a kind of something to send to her mom. "Hey, here's your daughter in the middle of a 14-foot tall rice field, cornfield." And it was Jimmy Red. And I happened to send that picture to David Chang, who was working with Ruth Reichel at the New York Times on, becoming world famous. No one knew it, not even David at the time. And he put Ansley's picture, my daughter, on his website as the landing page. And then that huge story that Ruth Reichel wrote in the New York Times about his restaurant and his efforts noted his support of Jimmy Red. And at that point, it just went crazy. And then everybody's calling up saying, "Can I get stuff?" We decided never to do retail on Jimmy Red so that other people could expand the corn. And fast forward to Scott and Ann at Highwire, they asked Brian Ward, who is still at Clemson University. He's a agronomist of very high stature now with a huge CV behind him. And back then, we were all working together by hand, and nobody gave a crap what we were doing. It wasn't hitting the media or anything. But Brian agreed with me to grow the first real scientifically managed and really good chem-free landrace Jimmy Red corn, and then actually track the variance because it was hugely variable. It had, I counted 7 different expressions, all different morphologies, all different colors on the hard starch endosperm, but the outside was always just red kernels. But as soon as you started looking at it genetically, it was really diverse. Brian helped with all that, and then Scott and Ann and I worked together with Brian, and Ann and Scott actually went out and busted it working by hand, literally all the time in that research field. And I believe it was 3 or 4, maybe even 5 acres. It wasn't small. And it was just them to start with. But when it came time to harvest it, 200 and some people showed up from downtown to help harvest the first Jimmy Red that was actually measured, scientifically grown with proper protocols for stability and identity. And at that point, we gave a ton of that seed away. But the best thing was that Scott and Ann intuitively knew to pick that corn to start with. Vera's the one that picked it. I didn't. I recommended it, but I didn't say this is the only one. There were like tons of corn there. They picked it on their own. It was kind of prescient. So this whole thing has had this kind of velocity to it that's just astounding. And now there's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of Jimmy Red. We have it. It's all the way over in Kentucky. It's out on the West Coast. It doesn't mature well in New England in the upper latitudes, but it does work in Pennsylvania. So we see it there. We see it. Some people in Michigan have even grown it at Zingerman's. So guess what? I think it's part of the national culture now, and it has to do with Ted tuning, with the people that we never found out who they were that gave him the seed in order to preserve it, and Scott and Ann. They almost exclusively did it. Greg Johnsman had Geechee Boy back then. It's now Marchand Mill. He was instrumental in doing the culinary side, and the best part of it is the best part for making beer is the hard starch blue endosperm Jimmy Red. So it's red on the outside, but it's got hard starch blue endosperm inside. That kernel is softer, starch is more approachable, and it malts better, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're thinking about beer, it was all there. This all happened after 1870. It was all there before anybody was even saying there was such a thing as Jimmy Red.
Right.
And it's wonderful corn.
That's awesome.
Why
Yeah.
is it? Yeah, I mean, it's such a crazy story and such a like serendipit. It's such a serendipitous story as well. But I mean, why do you think it's important to save these heritage corn varieties? I mean, you did give us some reasons, but I mean, there's so much other corn out there. Like,
True.
That came to dominate for some reason too, right? So like,
yeah.
but
Yeah, well, it flies in the face of everything that happened in genetics after 1850 in our country and after 1800 in Europe. We all know that the quote unquote hybrid revolution, Mendelian genetics, came in right after the turn of the 1800s in Europe and hit here hard by 1850. All the mills that had been milling corn like this for production and or staples or export stopped milling this kind of corn and went on hybrid corn. And that's where Henry Moore and the other legacy mazes were all crossed in to create what today is a short stature corn that can be grown 6 inches to 4 inches, sometimes even 2 inches apart. And they'll do 3 years and they'll only be 2.5 feet tall. And we're talking about genetics that's 14 foot tall. It can blow down, and it did. The entire Jimmy Red production in the center of South Carolina, thousands of acres, was blown down by a freak bomb cyclone that actually just knocked all the broke plants in half. But what that did was make the corn mature more like it does in Mexico when they break all the plants on half on purpose. So it's Mother Nature actually came in and went back to native foodways and broke the corn. It actually attains a better aroma flavor profile and matures evenly that way, instead of all over the map if you're just combining it. So we actually had one of the best harvests with the worst catastrophe for weather ever in the Jimmy Red production system. And it's just astounding what has happened that's serendipitous. Is you hit the perfect word from the very beginning. This corn wouldn't have made it to the coast had it not been for the Catawba. Wouldn't have made it to the coast if there hadn't been runaway slaves. Wouldn't have made it to the coast and even become part of the culture unless they realized that there was something inside that maize on a native basis, not on modern science, that took this corn forward. So it has its own sort of connection to sense of place. It's phenotypically plastic, which means it changes point to point. You can have Jimmy Red that tastes this way on one side of the field and Jimmy Red that tastes another way on the other side of the field. It's that variable, which is amazing. And splitting 2 miles apart, totally different aroma flavor profile. The corn looks exactly the same. The plants look exactly the same. The flavors are different. That's a challenge if you're looking for consistency in distilling and brewing. But it's also an invitation to return to the roots of where all this came from. I mean, the distilled spirits and brewing thousands of years old, nothing new about anything there. This actually takes advantage of everything that was there thousands of years ago in a modern take. And it's still ongoing and expanding. I've got people now I've never even heard of that if they have any problems with their seed, because we've supplied free seed for a long time now, um, that ask, and they don't even know that there's multiple cultivars, and you need to know which cultivar you're asking for. So I don't know of any other situation like that with any other specific variety of maize or any other plant for that matter that has attained this kind of consciousness in the American psyche.
This is awesome. Well, thank you, Glenn, for sharing that story. I love it. Can you share your social media handles and website so people can follow along with the interesting things you're doing?
Yeah, well, essentially the first thing I do always is say, Google and or whatever these days, Jimmy Red corn, and look at everybody that's producing it because we still don't offer it at retail. We offer it at wholesale, but we qualify what we offer it to in order to give people. It wouldn't have expanded had we just gone retail and hit it ourselves. We knew that up front because I was in the hotel business and you learn those things really fast, what you can and can't promote and what's good for something and what isn't good for something, even if it looks good. So having said that, we don't offer it at retail, but ansonmills.com is us. And click retail, and there isn't Jimmy Red. If you want to get it wholesale, you can at Anson Mills, and I will refer everything back to the people that actually took the chances on this. Ted Tuning is the person that deserves all the credit. He's actually written comprehensive history on what he could find out in real research on Jimmy Red, and Ann and Scott at Highwire, I think more than anyone at this point, anywhere, have taken this to the American public in so many different guises that it's blinding. Up to and including making me go with them all the way down to Tepanitza to see Pastor Rojo, which is the antecedent that's in the Keats and in Tepanitza in Oaxaca, Mexico, where the origin and center for origin of quote unquote Jimmy Red is, through all the machinations that got it both by water and by land to Appalachia and then down to us. And they're in the process of doing that research still. It's phenomenal. So there'll be, I guess, books and documentaries by the time everything's done that are very, very precise, peer reviewed, and tell the truth.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you, Glenn.
Yes,
Thanks, Glenn.
sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Cheers.
Y'all be good. Cheers.
Okay, so
Cheers.
Em,
Yes.
how cool was that? What did you think?
I didn't know corn could get that tall.
Yeah, right? It's the way, yeah, like Evan said, monoculture. Like we've been so, I don't want to say brainwashed, but like eating corn is so ubiquitous, we are completely unaware there's anything else, right?
It's true. Oh, I think it's a lot like people don't realize the varieties of barley.
Right.
Everyone just think it's like, oh, it's Pilsner malt, but like, where did it come from? And there's heritage barley, and there's, these new breeds that are coming out. There are new varieties of hops. And, we think about, you're right, the like eating corn, but there are a lot of varieties of corn out there that have different flavors, that are short, that are tall.
Yeah.
I
And
just,
and,
I just can't believe
and
how
like
tall corn can. I didn't know.
yeah. It could dunk, the corn could dunk on Shaq.
Yes.
But and also like they grow in different regions. Like everybody thinks of, corn being grown in Iowa and everything, but Bloody Butcher is from Virginia. And so if we can have brewers using these heritage barley varieties, then that returns that agricultural product to those regions, which I think
What
is really cool.
One of the things I thought was so interesting was that Glenn talked about the terroir of corn
Yeah.
and how like very similar to hops or other, you grow it on one side of a hill versus another, and there's different flavors and it'll grow differently. And
Yeah.
I never thought about that with corn.
Yeah. We have a lot I was going to say we have a lot to learn about corn, but we have a lot to relearn about corn because I have a
Yes.
feeling we actually knew this at one point, right? So, anyways, that's a teaser for the future of beer, I guess. Everybody, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you want to support the show, please visit allaboutbeer.com/support. That there you will find out how you can support this show and others. And if you have questions for the experts, please email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. How can people reach out to you?
I am at Pints and Panels on Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram, and my website is www.pintsandpanels.com. What about you, Don?
I am at the Dawn of Beer on X Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, and I am at the Beer Dawn on Facebook. And people can drop me an email at dawn@thedawnofbeer.com. And once again, friendly reminder that there's a reason podcasts always ask for listeners to subscribe and like the show. With more reviews and subscriptions, the algorithms show our podcast higher on the list when people search for beer podcasts. And that would really, really help us out. So please rate and subscribe to our podcast. Please help us spread the word of good beer. Here's a final word from our sponsors.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family owned, operated, and argued over.
This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers!
Cheers, everyone.
So if you're up for it, Evan, I have left this recording. We can just pause for a bit, and then if you want to sing your ditty, that would be awesome.
It's not really a tune. It's just the thing that goes in my head over and over. I plant this bloody butcher corn by hand, and I'm on my hands and knees, and it takes days. And there's a song that's repeating through my head that I've created ad nauseum. It's my field song, and it goes like this. Bloody butcher, and corn, the seed they planted when I was born. And in the field, there's nothing that yields as much as bloody butcher corn.
Awesome. That's
That's
awesome.
yay.